Hi everyone, it's Alice, and today it is again time to talk about some exciting new upcoming book releases, of which there are many. We have a lot of exciting new books coming out. I do these videos like 3 times a year, and I usually cover the next few months. So in this video, I'll be talking about books coming out from May until like the end of August, and then when autumn rolls around, I'll do another one, which of course, I'm already really excited about autumn, but it's probably too early to talk about it. But I have a really long list for today, so we should probably just get straight into it, starting with books coming out in May. The first book is one of the books that I am the most excited about that's coming out this whole year. It's The Tapestry of Fate, which is the sequel to The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, which is a historical fiction fantasy adventure book which follows a female pirate who comes out of retirement, and in the first book, she gets up to quite a lot. I absolutely loved the first book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I just thought it was so much fun, and I just loved the main character and everything about it. So I'm super excited that this is coming out, and the minute it is out, I will be getting it. Secondly, we have Enormous Wings. And this one caught my eye because it follows an elderly main character, which is one of the things that I really enjoy in books for some reason. And in this one, we follow this woman who is 77 years old, and she, sort of against her will, moves into a retirement home, and somehow she gets pregnant. It sounds absolutely wild, and I don't know how that's gonna go, but it's an interesting premise. Then we have The Calamity Club, which is a historical fiction book set in the 1930s, and I think we follow two characters. One is an 11-year-old orphan, and the other is a strong willed, outspoken woman, and somehow the fates of these two people come together. I don't really know why, but I know a lot of people are very excited about this book because this author wrote The Help, and I've never read anything from this author, but I've heard a lot of good things about her writing, and I've seen some early reviews for this, which seem very promising. Next, we have The Vivisectors, which caught my eye because it is set at a grand, crumbling university, and I always love a good academic setting, so whenever I come across that, I am immediately interested. This follows a graduate student, I think, who sort of lives as a recluse, like all by herself, and she makes a friend that sort of draws her out of her seclusion. And there's a lot of weird things going on at this university, and it seems kind of complicated, and I don't know. It sounds very weird, but sometimes I do really like weird books. The next one I had to include because this cover, I just love it. It's The Girl with a Thousand Faces. And the cover design for this is just immaculate. It's so good. And luckily, the story actually sounds really interesting. It seems to be a kind of mix of historical fiction, fantasy, and horror. And it follows a woman who washes ashore in Hong Kong, and she has no family, no money, no memories, and she ends up working as a ghost talker. And I think that means that she talks to like unsettled and angry spirits. And just the setup of that sounds amazing. And if the book is anything like The Outside, it's gonna be really good. We also have Decomposition book, which is another horror book, and it sounds pretty unsettling. It follows this woman who, after having a big falling out with her best friend, she goes to her parents' lake house, and she sort of secludes herself there. She doesn't talk to anyone, and one day she wakes up next to a dead body, and she doesn't report that to the police. She decides to try and figure out who this person is, and I think she finds like a diary or something, and she delves into the life of this dead person who then she starts talking to, and I guess maybe she thinks she made a new friend. I don't know. It sounds horrifying, but interesting. Then we have a mystery. It's The Library After Dark, which follows a bookseller who goes with her boyfriend to this exclusive after hours tour of this grandiose, possibly haunted library, and I think that they get stuck there or something, and someone is murdered, and it's a whole thing. But the idea of this setting is really intriguing to me, like this maybe haunted, huge, beautiful library. Like, that's just an excellent setting for anything, but maybe especially a murder. Next up is Honey, which is more like horror mystery, and again, this has an academic setting. It follows a PhD student who is bored out of her mind, and she's really struggling, and then she witnesses the death of a professor, and it says that this awakens a taste for murder in her, which I don't know what that means, but I think I would like to read about it. We also have Artifacts, which caught my eye because this seems to be a mystery novel that sort of is about like museums and artifacts and crime, and that just seems like a great mix to me. I think that it has two timelines. I'm pretty sure one is set at an archaeological dig back in the day, and then we have a more like present day perspective, which is there's like a case about an illegal item in a museum, and I think that there's a murder. I don't really know how all of this comes together, but a lot of these elements are really interesting in stories, to me at least. The next one appears to have a slightly lighter vibe. It's Safari Murder, which follows a main character who goes on this corporate retreat where I think they're on some sort of isolated island, and the CEO dies during their stay there, and in his will it says that whoever in the company survives the week on the island, they inherit the whole company. It sounds totally crazy, but I think it could be interesting. I like this idea of like some sort of crazy corporate thing, and the setting also sounds really good. Then we have one that sounds like it has some adventure to it. It's Canon, which I think is a mix of like fantasy and science fiction, and it follows two unlikely heroes who have to go on a quest to win God's favor, whatever that means in this world. And I'm always up for a good quest, and like anything to do with an adventure, I'm always up for it. Another great cover for this next one, it's Homebound, which is science fiction, and it seems like this has several timelines going on, and one is set in the future, one is set in the past. We maybe have a contemporary one, and all of these timelines have something to do with something that a girl does in 1983 after the death of her uncle, who is like the only person in the world who really understood her. And I don't really know much more than that, but I am immediately intrigued just because it's science fiction, and I really like science fiction when it's done like this, where we have like a past perspective and a future perspective and it all comes together. And also this cover doesn't hurt. Next up, we've got Hunger and Thirst, which is horror, I think. I don't know if I'm fully grasping what the story is about, but I think it's about a 16-year-old girl who's been like in and out of the care system, but she's sort of trying to get her life together, and she makes a new friend who invites her to squat in this weird house, and then the friend gets more and more demanding, so things just get kind of weird. I don't really know, but I have heard a lot of really good things about this author, and I've never read anything from her, so I really should. The next one caught my eye because it's a story about sisters. It's Mercy Hill, and this follows four sisters who grow up on the campus of this mental hospital where their mother works as like head of psychiatry, and just that alone is enough for me. And then in addition to that, it's set in like the late 90s, early 2000s, which for me is like a great time period. So all of that together makes me very interested. And then we have a short story collection that I'm interested in. It's Patient Female, and this just caught my eye because of the title and the cover, to be honest. With short stories, it's always really difficult to know what you're getting, so whenever I pick them, I usually just go by like the title and the cover, and I just see what I find. But I do know that all of these stories are about women, which is always interesting. Lastly, for me, we have The Great Houses of Pill Hill, which is another mystery, and I think this is a locked room mystery, which I usually really enjoy. It follows a woman who works as, I don't know what you call it, but she makes like miniatures of different crime scenes. Like that's her job. And she gets a new job at this grand house, and I think she gets stuck there because something happens. It's probably related to the crime scene or the murder or whatever has happened. And just that sounds like a very interesting setup. On to the books coming out in June. We have a new book coming out from Sara Winman. It's A Year of Marvelous Ways. And I've only read one book by this author, but I loved that book and I really want to read more. This one is set in 1947, and we follow this older woman. I think she's in her like 80s or 90s or something, who lives alone, and she's lived most of her life alone. And then she comes into contact with this soldier who is reeling after the war. And what happens with that, I don't really know, but this author is like, at least the book I read, I loved the writing and I loved the characters and it was so emotional. So I think this is going to be a great read. Secondly, for June, we have The Future Perfect, which is a contemporary coming of age novel, and it says it follows a main character who grows up between cultures and between worlds. And the thing that caught my eye about this is that it says it's like a love letter to girlhood, which obviously sounds amazing. We also have a new book coming out from Kathryn Arden. It's The Unicorn Hunters, which I'm very excited about because anything this author writes, I will read. I've read several of her books and I've loved them, so I'm very excited about this. It's, I think, fantasy, historical fiction, or something like that, and it follows an orphaned duchess who is being forced to marry the king of France, but then I don't think she wants to do that, so she ends up like promising herself to the greatest enemy of France. I don't really know if I'm grasping this, but it seems to sort of be set in our world, but there is magic because it mentions that the different courts can like use magic to spy on each other. And I think that the main character ends up setting up her own court in like deep in the forest. And just that sounds amazing, and I'm sure that this author, like, I think the worlds that she makes and like creates are just so good, and it's usually really atmospheric. So I'm super excited about this. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. Then we have Land, which I really like the cover of, and it's always exciting to see this author write something. I loved Hamnet by her, so I'm always interested whenever she comes out with something new. This sounds really good. It's set in the 1800s and it follows a son and a father, and I think they're working on mapping all of Ireland, and while they're doing that they come across something that changes everything. And it says it's a story about buried treasure, ancient woodland, and ghosts. How all of this comes together, I don't know, but I'm very excited to get my hands on this one. Next up, we have Whistler, and this is another one that I'm not sure I'm totally grasping what this is about, but it says it's about a woman who runs into an older man who used to be a part of her life when she was like 9 years old. He was married to her mother for around a year, and the story is all about them sort of unpacking that year and the impact that they had on each other and looking back on that with sort of adult eyes. I don't really know. It could be interesting. I haven't read anything from this author, but I do have one of her books on my shelves, so I should probably read that first. Then we have Girl's Girl, and just the title of this caught my eye. This is, I think, a sort of coming of age story. It follows a trio of friends, and I think we just followed this friendship through its ups and downs through their teenage years, which of course that's always how friendships are when you're a teenager. And I think the book is just about that. I love books about female friendship, so of course I'm interested in this one. Another coming of age novel we have is Villa Coco, which I think follows this young man who takes up a position as like a personal assistant or something like that to this woman who lives in the Italian countryside, and she's quite eccentric, and I think we just follow his journey working there for the summer in this interesting and vivid and slightly secretive house. We also have Daughters of the Sun and Moon coming out. This is a historical fiction novel set in 1870, I think, and we follow three Chinese women who get to Los Angeles, and they all seem quite different from each other and they want different things, but I think the story is just about them coming there and trying to build a life for themselves, and it's probably all about the challenges that they face, which I'm sure there's many of. This author, I've read a few books by her, and they're a little hit or miss for me, but this does sound interesting. Next up, we've got Nymph, which again is a coming of age story. There's a lot of those coming out, it seems. And this is set over the course of 2 summers in the mountains of northern Italy, where our main character works as like a maid for these 2 summers. And I don't know, I just really like coming of age stories, and I feel like I don't read enough of them, so I need to read more. I also really like the cover for this next one. It's Farfield County, which is historical fiction set in the American South, and we follow this family who has spent a century living on this land where there's a farm. And I think we follow in particular a father and a daughter in maybe the latest generation of this family trying to survive on this farm. And just the setting of that sounds amazing. Like, I feel like that's going to be a very atmospheric setting. And I do think this again has some like coming of age vibes to it. Then there's The Top of the World, and this is set in 1975. And we follow this character who has just graduated from high school. And I think her brother has just passed away, but it seems like he disappeared like a few months before he died, kind of by his own choice, it seems. And she needs closure to that whole situation, so she wants to retrace his steps. And this brings her to this resort town where I think her brother ended up dying. And just the setup of that sounds really interesting. It seems like this explores like sibling relationships, which is something that I really like reading about. The next one sounds a little wild. It's Sublimation, which is a mix of like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, I think. And it's set in a world where if you immigrate to another country, you leave a copy of yourself behind. So that copy keeps living where you're coming from, and then you move on to this other country. And we meet a main character who has left Korea for America, and she thinks she's never going to go back, but then her grandmother dies and she wants to go to the funeral. So she returns, and it seems like her copy, or whatever you want to call it, has some plans for her, and it sounds really creepy. Next, we have another great cover. It's Muñeca, and this caught my eye in part because of the cover, and in part because it's a surreal gothic story about a witch. And do we even really need to know any more than that? Any witch book, I'm always up for. Speaking of witches, we also have Witch Season, and this is like a fantasy romance, I think, and it follows two witches from different covens who I think they immediately dislike each other when they meet, but they have to come together because there is a powerful threat on the horizon. Lastly, for June, we have Heather, which just sounds really good. It's a mystery set in a small town, which I love. And there's something that happened in this small town in 1994 where two sisters went missing. And it seems like no one ever figured out what happened with that. And I think in a more contemporary time, we meet a detective who's new to the town, and she comes across something that might be connected to that case. I don't know if like how it connects or if someone else disappears or whatever is going on, but just the whole setup of that, I really like those kinds of books, and I really like the cover for this, so I get a good feeling from it. We're now halfway through, folks. We're getting into the books coming out in July, and the first one we have here is very exciting. It's We Were Forbidden, which is by the author who wrote I Who Have Never Known Men, which I and a lot of other people absolutely loved, so it's exciting to see something else come out from her. I do think this is a short story collection, and I'm not sure if these stories are like linked or not, or I don't know, but they're all about women having to escape, which is interesting. And anything this author writes, I'm immediately interested in because I just loved I Who Have Never Known Men so much. Then we have Habits of the Sea, which I'm actually very interested in. I have read one book by this author, which I liked, but I didn't love, and a lot of people actually recommend that book to me, which I understand, but I think the reason I didn't love it is because it's YA, which I'm generally not that interested in. But this is an adult book, and it both looks and sounds really good. It follows a woman who, when she was 12 years old, she found this mysterious floating island with a man living on it. But then later, that island disappears and she can't find it again. But then as an adult, I think somehow she comes across this island again, and the man is still living on it, but he hasn't aged at all. And just the premise of that sounds so good, and yeah, it looks like it's going to be a very atmospheric read, and I don't know what's going to happen, but it just sounds so intriguing. Moving on, we have something that looks like it has a totally different vibe. It's Destination Funeral, and this sounds wild. It's about these four friends who I think grew up together, and they were really good friends, but as adults they're estranged for whatever reason, and then one of them dies and the other friends go to the funeral, and things are a little weird because they haven't spoken in so long, and then I think they end up stuck in a time loop. And I love a good time loop in a book, and I didn't see that coming when I like looked at this cover, and I'm so interested in that. It sounds crazy, like these people stuck in this time loop and they have to figure a lot of stuff out, and yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. Back to some horror, we have The Sea Hides Its Dead, which sounds really creepy. It's about this grad student who ends up going on this anthropological research trip where these people are looking into a sea-based cult of some kind, and they used to live in these caves, and so they go to these caves to do research, and then I think they get stuck in there and weird things start happening in these caves, and just I don't know what it is about like caves that really freak me out, but yeah, it's just very creepy to me, but I'm also intrigued. I think it could be very good, but I'm also a little scared. We also have a cozy fantasy book coming out. It's Theodora's Tea Shop, which is a 1920s inspired fantasy novel, which follows this quite timid person who really wants to learn about magic, and she thinks that if she goes to this big city, and I think to the owner of this tea shop, she thinks that maybe she can teach her magic. And it seems like this is a book all about magic and friendship, which of course I love. Next, another cover that I really like, we have Country People, and this follows I think a couple where the man in the couple is kind of like lost in life wherever they're living, and he doesn't really have a lot of direction. But then the wife gets offered a visiting professorship at this like prestigious school in Vermont in the middle of the forest. And I don't really care what happens after that because I would really like to see the school in the forest. We have a family saga in this next one. It's The Great Wherever. And this is like historical fiction with some fantasy or supernatural elements to it because I think it has ghosts. And it's set in the American South, and it's about this family who lives on this farm for generations. And I think we follow several generations, and there's a lot of drama in this family. And having ghosts on this farm, I'm sure, is not very helpful, so it all sounds a little complicated. Up next, there is The Intrigue, and this is an author I keep meaning to read something from, and I just never get around to it. But this is her new book. It's set in the 1940s in Mexico, and I think it's about some people coming together to scam someone or something like that. I don't really know. I think I will probably read the book that I have by her on my shelves first, but yeah, I really need to get around to that book. Second to last for July, we have Everything to the Sea, and this is a romance book, and it follows a character who returns to Hawaii, which is where she's from, the summer before her senior year of college, and she goes there to work and make money. And she has decided this is going to be the last time that she ever goes there. And then she meets some boy from her past, and sparks fly. And I think the story is all about them being torn apart by a natural disaster that hits the island. And the story is all about like their love trying to survive this and them maybe finding each other after this thing tears them apart. I don't really know, but it sounds pretty both horrible and epic. Lastly, for July, before we move on to August, we have The Mortons, which both sounds and looks a little wild. It's about a family of stone cold killers, and I guess they're raised to be killers or something, and we follow our main character who's a part of this family, and she goes to this prestigious college or school or something, and she has just like done her first kill, but that has some consequences that no one saw coming. And it all sounds a little complicated and kind of wild, and this family sounds really messed up. Finally, we have made it to August. We're in the final stretch now. First up for this month, we have Daggerbound, which I'm so impressed that this author writes so much. Like, she comes out with new books several times a year, and it's kind of a lot to keep up with, but I'm also super excited about it because she's one of my favorite authors and I love her books. This is the sequel to Sword Heart, which I haven't read yet, but I will soon. And all I know about the first book is that it's about a woman who inherits this, like, huge house, and in that house she finds a sword, and there is a man living in the sword. That's all I know about that book, and I don't know where that goes or where this is taking it, but anything from this author I'm always excited about. We also have Meet Me in the Garden, and I'm intrigued by this one. I read a book by this author years ago. I think it was a YA book, and I can't remember anything about it, but she's now writing adult books, and this is set in New Orleans in the 1940s, and we follow a woman who doesn't want a conventional life. She wants something totally different, and I think the story is just about that. Then there's a new book coming out from Riley Sager. It's The Unknown, and this sounds interesting. I think it's set on a remote island in Vermont, which sounds like a great setting. And in the 1920s, there was a case where all of these girls disappeared. I think there were like 5 of them. And then in contemporary times, someone is going there to make a movie about this case, I think. And then weird things start happening on this island, and it seems like maybe history is repeating itself, which is not great. For this next one, the title caught my eye. It's The Whitechapel Full Moon Society, which is historical fiction, and it's set in Victorian London during the reign of Jack the Ripper. And we meet a character who goes to London to find her brother who has gone missing, and she comes across the society because I think she thinks that they can help her find her brother, and she ends up working there as a maid to sort of pay for her stay. And the longer she stays, the more weird things start happening and the more secrets she unearths about this house and this society. Then we have some literary fiction horror. It's The Hill in the Dark Grove, which is about 2 sheep farmers who are working in the mountains of Wales, and it seems like it's quite a tough life. And the story is about what happens when they find an ancient ruin on their lands, and some sort of obsession takes over one of them. This next one is a mystery. It's The Shadow Friends, and this just sounds interesting to me because it follows a group of retired spies, and I think they have to come out of retirement when this renowned disease expert dies at a convention in Paris. And just the setup of that sounds really nice. I don't know how old these spies are, but I usually really like these kinds of stories where the main characters are a little bit older. We have more horror with mostly human resources, and I really like the title of that. It follows a main character who works for a company, and I think the point of the company is to like categorize and manage the monsters and cryptids of the world, and that alone sounds very interesting. But I think the main character ends up going, like, someone disappears and she ends up going to try and find this person in the woods or something, and based on the fact that there's monsters and cryptids in this world, I am guessing that gets a little scary. I really like the cover for this next one. It's The Wild Beneath, and the setup of this sounds very unique. It's about a woman who gets stranded on an island, and she runs into this other man who doesn't speak. He only emits like a hum that only she can hear. But then she wakes up one day and he's gone. And then years later, she's obviously made it off of this island and she's living her own life. And then she starts hearing this hum again, which sounds so creepy, but also very interesting. I don't know if this is like horror or what this is, but it sounds very interesting. We're almost at the end now. Next we have Stay Buried, which is a book that has 2 timelines. One is set in the 1920s, I think, and one is set in 2016. And both of these timelines have something to do with this town where they have some really unsettling traditions. And I don't really know what that means, but it sounds creepy. Second to last, we have The Unheld, which is a Western type horror about a girl who has to travel across the haunted Montana territory to save her father from an otherworldly creature, which sounds Very stressful. Then at the very end, we have Time Travel for Beginners, which is about three characters whose lives converge when they all come into contact with this very unusual travel agency. And I'm guessing that this travel agency offers time travel, and any book that has anything to do with like time travel or time loops or anything like that, I'm always interested in. If you made it all the way through this, gold star to you, because that was a very long list of books and I feel like I've been talking for ages. But there's just so many exciting new books coming and there's so much to read. So little time. I would love to know which ones of these you'd be interested in reading though. Tell me all about it in the comments, or if there's something else coming out that you're really excited about, I would love to hear about it. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!